Timer starting 1 hour. Right. You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Right now.
All right. This is letter number. This is letter number 5, Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe. I've been hindered from prosecuting my intention. Neither nights nor mornings have been my own. Letters January 20th, by the way. My mama has been very ill and would have no other nurse but me. I have not stirred from her bedside, for she kept her bed, and 2 nights I had the honor of sharing it with her. Her disorder was a very violent colic. The contentions of these masculine spirits, and the apprehension of mischief that may arise from the increasingly animosity which all here have against Mr. Lovelace and his too well-known resentful and intrepid character she cannot bear. Then the foundation laid, as she dreads, for jealousy and heartburnings in her family late, so happy and so united, afflict exceedingly a gentle and sensible mind, which has from the very beginning, on all occasions, sacrificed its own inward satisfaction to outer peace. My brother and sister, who used very often to jar, are now so much one and so much together. Caballing was the word that dropped from her as if at unawares. That she is full of fears and consequences that may follow, to my prejudice, perhaps is her kind concern, since she sees that they behave to me every hour with more and more shyness and reserve. Yet would she but exert that authority which the superiority of her fine talents give her, all these family feuds might perhaps be crushed in their but yet beginnings, especially as she may be assured that all fitting concessions shall be made by me, not only as they are my elders, but for the sake of so excellent and so indulgent a mother. For, if I may say to you, my dear, what I would not to any other person living, it is my opinion that she had been of a temper that would not have borne less. She would have 10 times less to bear than she had. No commendation, you'll say, of generosity of those spirits, which can turn to its own disquiet so much condescending goodness. Upon my word, I am sometimes tempted to think that we may make the world allow for and respect us as we please, if we can but sturdy in our wills and set out accordingly. It is but being the less beloved for it, that's all. And if we have the power to oblige those who have to do with, it will not appear to us that we are. Our flatterers will tell us anything sooner than our faults. Were there not truth in this observation? Is it possible that my brother and sister could make their very failings the vehemences of such importance to all family? How will my son, how will my nephew take this or that measure? What will he say to it? Let us consult about it. Let us consult him about it. And our references always previous to every resolution taken by his superiors, whose will ought to be his. Well, may he expect to be treated with this deference by every other person, when my papa himself, generally so absolute, constantly pays it to him, and the more since his godmother's bounty has given independence to a spirit that was before unto little restraint. But whither may these reflections lead me? I know you do not love any of us, but my mamma and me. Being above all disguises makes me sensible that you do not, often that I wish you did. Ought I then add force to your dislikes of those whom I wish you more to like, my father especially? For he, poor gentleman, has some excuse for his impatience of contradiction. He is not naturally an ill-tempered man, and in his person and air, and in his conversation too, when not he under torture of a gouty paroxysm. Everybody distinguishes the gentleman born and educated. Our sex perhaps more expect to bear a little uncourtliness, shall I call it, from the husband as the lover. They let know the preference their hearts gave him to all other men. Say what they will of generosity being a manly virtue, but upon my word, my dear, I have yet observed that it is not to be met in that sex one time in 10, that it is to be found in ours. But my father was soured by the cruel distemper I named, which seized him at once in his very prime of life, in such a violent manner as to take the most active of minds as his was all power of activity, and that in all appearance for life. It imprisoned, as I may say, his lively spirits in himself, and turned the edge of them against his own peace, his extraordinary prosperity adding but to his impatiency. For those, I believe, who want the fewest earthly blessings most regret that they want any. But my brother, what an excuse can be made for his haughty and morose temper? He is really, my dear, I am sorry to have occasion to say it, an ill-tempered young man, and treats my mamma sometimes. Indeed, he is not dutiful, but possessing everything, he has the vice of an age mingled with the ambition of youth, and enjoys nothing but his own haughtiness and ill temper, I was going to say. Yet again, I am adding force to your dislike of some of us. Once, my dear, it was perhaps in your power to have molded him as you please. Could you have been my sister? Then I had a friend and a sister, but no wonder that he don't love you now, who could nip in the bud, and that with a disdain, let me say, too much akin to his haughtiness, a passion that would have not wanted a fever worthy of the object, and which possibly could have made him so. But no more of this. I will prosecute my former intention in my next, which I will sit down as soon as breakfast is over, dispatching this by the messenger whom you have so kindly sent to inquire after us on my silence. Meantime, I am your most affectionate and obliged friend and servant, Clarissa Harlow. Letter number 6. Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe, Harlow Place, January 20th. I will now resume my narrative of proceedings here. My brother being in a good way, although you may be sure that his resentments are rather heightened than abated by the galling disgrace he has received. My friends, my papa, my uncles, however, if not my brother and sister, begin to think that I have been treated unkindly. My mama has been so good to tell me this since I sent away my last. Nevertheless, I believe they all think that I received letters from Mr. Lovelace, but Lord M, being inclined rather to support rather than blame his nephew, they seem to be so much afraid of him that they do not put it to me whether I do or not, conniving on the contrary, as it should seem, at the only method left to allay the vehemence of a spirit which they have so much provoked, for he still insists upon satisfaction from my uncles, and this possibly for he warrant not art as the best way to be introduced again with some advantage into our family. And indeed, my Aunt Hervey has put it to my mamma, whether it were not best to prevail upon my brother to take a turn to his Yorkshire estate, which he was intending to do before, and tarry there till all of this is blown over. But this is very far from being his intention, for he has already begun to hint again that he shall never be easy or satisfied till I am married, and finding neither Mr. Sims nor Mr. Mullins will be acceptable, has proposed Mr. Wiley once more on the score of his great passion for me. This I have again rejected, and but yesterday he mentioned one who has applied to him by letter, making offers. This is Mr. Solmes, Rich Solmes, you know they call him, but this has not met with the attention of one single soul. If none of these schemes of marrying me take effect, he has thoughts, I'm told, of proposing to me to go to Scotland in order, as the compliment is, to put his house there in such an order as is ours. But this my mamma intends to oppose for her own sake, because having relieved her, as she is pleased to say, of the household cares for which my sister, you know, has no term, they must again devolve upon her if I go. And if she did not oppose it, I should, for, believe me, have no mind to be his housekeeper. And as I'm sure were I to go with him, I should be treated as a servant than a sister, perhaps not the better that because I am his sister. And if Mr. Lovelace should follow me, things might get worse than they are now. But I have besought my mamma, whose apprehension of Mr. Lovelace's visits, and for fear of my uncles never stir out without arms and armed servants, my brother also being near well to go out abroad again, to procure me permission to be your guest for a fortnight or so. Will your mamma, think you, my dear, give me leave? I dare not ask go to my dairy house, as my good grandfather would call it, for I am now afraid of being thought to have a wish to enjoy that independence to which his will has entitled me. And as matters are situated, such a wish would be imputed to my favor to the man whom they now so great have an antipathy to. And indeed, could I be as easy and happy here as I used to be, I would defy that man and all his sex, and never repent that I have been given the power of my fortune into my papa's house and hand. Just now, my mamma has rejoiced me with the news that my requested permission is granted. Everyone thinks it best that I should go to you, except my brother. He was told that he must not expect to rule in everything. I am to be sent for into the great parlor where my two uncles and my Aunt Hervey and to be acquainted with this concession in form. You know, my dear, that there is a great deal of solemnity among us, but never was there a family more united in its different branches than ours. Our uncles consider us as their own children, and declare that it is for our sakes they live single, so that they are advised with upon every article relating to, or that they may affect us. It is therefore the less wonder at a time when they understand that Mr. Lovelace is determined to pay us an amicable visit, as he calls it, but which I am sure cannot end so, that they should both be consulted upon the permission had I desired to attend you. I will acquaint you with what has passed at the general leave given me to your guest, to be your guest. And yet I know that you will not love my brother the better for my communication. But I am angry with him myself and cannot help it. And besides, it is proper to let you know the terms I go upon and their motives for permitting me to go. Clary, said my mamma, as soon as I entered the great parlor, your request to go to Miss Howe for a few days has been taken into consideration and granted. Much against my liking, I assure you, said my brother, rudely interrupting her. Son James, said my father, and knit his brow. He was not daunted. His arm is in a sling. He often has the mean art to look upon that when anything, I'm going to pause for a second. All right, I'm resuming. Much against my disliking, I assure you, said my brother, rudely interrupting her. Son James, said my father, and knit his brow. He was not daunted. His arm is in a sling. He often has the mean art to look upon that when anything is hinted that may be supposed to lead towards at least favor to or reconciliation with Mr. Lovelace. Let the girl, then I'm often the girl with him, be prohibited, seeing that vile libertine. Nobody spoke. Do you hear, Sister Clary, taking their silence for approbation of what he dictated? You are not to receive visits from Lord M.'s nephew. Everyone remained silent. Do you understand the license you have, miss? Interrogated he. I would be glad, sir, said I, to understand that you are my brother, and that you would understand that you are only my brother. Oh, the fond, fond heart, with a sneer of insult lifting up his hands. Sir, said I to my papa, to your justice I appeal. If I have deserved reflection, let me not be spared. If I am to be answerable for the rashness. No more of either side, said my papa. You are not to receive visits of that Lovelace, though. Nor are you, son James, to reflect upon your sister. She is a worthy child. Sir, I have done, replied he, and yet I have her honor at heart as much as the honor of the rest of the family. And hence, sir, retorted I, your unbrotherly reflections upon me. Well, but you observe, miss, said he, that it is not I, but your papa that tells you that you are not to receive the visits of that Lovelace. Cousin Harlowe, said my Aunt Hervey, allow me to say that my cousin Clary's prudence may be confided in. I am convinced it may, joined my mamma. But, aunt, madam, put in my sister, there is no hurt, I presume, in letting my sister know the conditions she goes to Miss Howe upon, since if he gets a knack of visiting her there. You may be sure, interrupted my Uncle Harlowe, he will endeavor to see her there. So would such an imprudent man here, said my Uncle Antony, and 'tis better there than here. Better nowhere, said my papa. I command you, turning to me, on pain of my displeasure, that you see him not at all. I will not, sir, in any way of encouragement. I do assume you, nor at all if I can decently avoid it. You know with what indifference, said my mamma, she said here to seeing him. Her prudence may be trusted, as my sister Hervey says. With what an apparent indifference drove my brother. Son James, said my father sternly. I have done, sir, said he, but again in provoking manner reminded me of the prohibition. Thus ended this conference. Will you engage, my dear, that the hated man shall not come near your house? But what an inconsistence is this, when they consent to my going, thinking his visits here no otherwise must be avoided. But if he does come, I charge you never leave us alone. As I have no reason to doubt a welcome from your mama, I will put everything in order here and will be with you in 2 or 3 days. Meantime, your most affectionate and obliged, Clarissa Harlow. Letter 7, Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe. After her return from her Harlow Place, February 20th. I beg your excuse for not writing sooner. Alas, my dear, I have sad prospects before me. My brother and sister have succeeded in all their views. They have found out another lover for me, a hideous one, yet he is encouraged by everybody. No wonder that I was ordered home so suddenly at an hour's warning. No other notice, than what was brought with the chariot that was to carry me back. It was for fear that I have been informed, an unworthy fear, that I should have entered into any concert with Mr. Lovelace had I known their motive for commanding me home, apprehending 'tis evident that I should dislike the man. And well might they apprehend so, for who do you think it is? No other than that Solmes. Could you have believed it? They are all determined too, my mamma with the rest. Dear, dear Excellence, how could she be thus brought over, when I am assured that on his first being proposed, she was pleased to say that had Mr. Solmes the Indies in his possession and would endow me with them, she should not think him deserving of her Clarissa Harlow. The reception I met with at my return was so different than what I was used to meet with on every little absence. And now I had been from them 3 weeks, convinced me that I was to suffer for the happiness I had in your company and conversation for that most agreeable period. I will give you an account of it. My brother met me at the door and gave me his hand when I stepped out of the chariot. He bowed very low. Pray, miss, favor me. I thought it to be in good humor, but found it afterwards mock respect. And so he led me in great form, prattling all the way, inquiring of everyone's health, although I so soon to see them, and they was hardly time for answers, into the great parlor where my father, mother, my 2 uncles, and my sister. I was struck all of a heap as soon as I entered to see a solemnity which I had been so little used to, like on occasions in the countenance of everyone of dear relation. They all kept their seats. I ran to my papa and kneeled, then to my mamma, and met from both a cold salute. From my papa a blessing, but half pronounced. My mamma indeed called me child, but embraced me not with her usual indulgent ardor. After I paid my duty to my uncles and my compliments to my sister, which she received with solemn and stiff form, I was bid to sit down, but my heart was full, and I said it became me to stand if I could stand a reception so awful and unusual. I was forced to turn my face from them and pull out my handkerchief. My unbrotherly accuser hereupon stood forth and charged me with having received no less than 5 or 6 visits at Miss Howe's from the man they had all much so reason to hate. That was the expression, notwithstanding the commands I had received to the contrary. And he bid me to deny it if I could. I have never been used, I said, to deny the truth, nor would I now. I owned I had in the past 3 weeks seen the person I presumed he meant oftener than 5 or 6 times. Pray hear me out, brother, said I, for he was going to flame, but he always came and asked for Mrs. or Miss Howe. I proceeded that I had reason to believe that most Mrs. Howe or Miss matters, as matters stood, would have much rather have excused his visits, but they had more than once apologized, having not the same reason my papa had to forgive them in their house. His rank and his fortune entitled him to civility. You see, my dear, I made not the pleas I might have made. My brother seemed ready to give a loose to his passion. My father put out the countenance which always portends a gathering storm. My uncles mutteringly whispered, and my sister aggravatedly held up her hands, while I begged to be heard out, and my mamma said, "Let the child," that was her kind word, "be heard." I hoped, I said, there was no harm done, that it became not me to prescribe to Mrs. or Miss Howe who should be their visitors, that Mrs. Howe had always diverted with the raillery that had passed between Miss and him, that I had no reason to challenge her guest as for my visitor, as I should seem to have done had I refused to go into their company when he was with them, that I had never seen him out of the presence of one or both of those ladies, and had signified to him once on his urging for a few moments of private conversation with me, that unless a reconciliation were effected between my family and his, he must not expect that I would have countenance his visits, much less give him an opportunity of that sort. I told them further that Miss Howe was so well understood my mind, that she never left me a moment while he was there, that when he came, if I was not below in the parlor, I would not suffer myself to be called to him, although I thought it would be an affection that would be given him an advantage rather than the contrary if I had left company when he came, or refused to enter into it when I found he would stay any time. My brother heard me out with such a kind impatience as he showed he was resolved to be dissatisfied with me, say what I would. The rest, as the event has proved, behaved as if they would have been satisfied had they not further points to carry by intimidating me. All this made it evident, as I mentioned above, that they themselves expected not my voluntary compliance, and was a tacit confession of the disagreeableness of the person they had to propose. I was no sooner silent than my brother swore, although in my papa's presence, swore unchecked either by eye or countenance, that, for his part, he would never be reconciled with that libertine, and that he would renounce me for a sister if I ever encouraged the addresses of a man so obnoxious to them all. A man who had liked to have been my brother's murderer, my sister said, with a face even bursting with the restraint of passion. The poor Bella has, as you know, a plump, high-fed face, if I may be allowed the expression. You know, forgive me for this liberty of speech sooner than I can myself, yet how can I be such a reptile as not to have turned when trampled upon? My papa, with vehemence, both of action and voice, my father has, as you know, a terrible voice when he's angry, told me that I had met with too much indulgence in being allowed to refuse this gentleman and the other gentleman, and it was now his turn to be obeyed. Very true, my mamma said, and hoped his will would not be disputed by a child so favored. To show they were all of a sentiment, my uncle Harlow said he hoped his beloved niece only wanted to know her papa's will to obey it. I was astonished, you must need to think. Whose addresses now, thought I, is this treatment preparative to? Mr. Wiley's again, or whose? And then, as high comparisons where self is concerned sooner than low come into young people's heads, be it for all it will, this is wooing, as the English did for the heiress of Scotland in the time of Edward VI. But that it could be for Solmes. How should it enter into my head? I did not know, I said, that I had given occasion to this harshness. I hoped that I should have always a just sense of their favor to me, superadded to the duty I owed as a daughter and a niece, but that was so much surprised at a reception so unusual and so unexpected that I'd hoped my papa and mama would give me leave to retire in order to recollect myself. No one gainsaying, I made my silent compliments and withdrew, leaving my brother and sister, as I thought, pleased as if they wanted to congratulate each other on having occasioned such a severe a beginning to be made with me. I went up to my chamber, and there with my faithful Hannah deplored the determined face with the new proposal. It was plain they had to make me war. I had not recovered myself when I was sent down for tea. I begged by my maid to be excused attending, but on the repeated command went down with as much cheerfulness as I could assume, and had a new fault to clear myself of. For my brother, so pregnant a thing is determined ill will by intimidation, equally rude and intelligible, charged my desire of being excused coming down to Sullens, because a certain person had been spoken against, and upon opposed he supposed my fancy ran. I could easily answer you, sir, said I. As such a reflection deserves, I forbear. If I do not find a brother in you, you shall have a sister in me. Pretty meekness, Bella whispered, said, looking at my brother and lifting up her lip in contempt. He, with an imperious air, bid me deserve his love, and I should be sure to have it. As we sat, my mamma, in her admirable manner, expatiated upon brotherly and sisterly love, indulgently blamed my brother and sister upon having taken up displeasure too lightly against me, and politically, if I may say, answered for my obedience to my papa's will. Then it would be all well, my papa was pleased to say. Then they should dote on me, was my brother's expression. Love me as well as ever, was my sister's, and my uncle's, that I should be the pride of their hearts. But alas, what a forfeiture of all these must I make. This was the reception I had upon my return from you. Mr. Solmes came in before we had done tea. My Uncle Anthony presented him to me as a gentleman he had a particular friendship for. My Uncle Harlow in terms equally favorable for him. My father said, Mr. Solmes is my friend, Clarissa. My mamma looked at him and looked at me now and then as he sat near me, and I thought with concern at her with her eyes appealing for pity. At him when I could glance at him with disgust, little short of affrightment, while my mother, brother, and sister, Mrs. Solmes, him, and served him up with high favor. So caressed, in short, by all, yet such a wretch. But I will at present only add my humble thanks and duty to your honored mamma, to whom I will be particularly right to express the grateful sense I have of her goodness, and that I am your ever obliged Clarissa Harlow. Letter 8, Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe. They drive on from here at a furious rate. The man lives here, I think. He courts February 24th. They drive on here at a furious rate. The man lives here, I think. He courts them and is more and more favorite. Such terms, such settlements, that's the cry. Oh, my dear, that I had not reason to deplore the family fault, immensely rich as they all are. But this I may more unreservedly say to you, as we more often join in the same concern, I for a father and uncle, you for a mother, in every other respect faultless. Here through Tao, I seem to be delivered over my brother, who pretends as great love to me as ever. You may be believed I have been very sincere with him, but he affects to rally me, and not to believe it possible that one so dutiful, so discreet as the sister Clary can resolve to be obliged to her friends. Indeed, I tremble at the prospect before me, for it is evident that they are strangely determined. My father and mother industriously avoid giving me opportunity of speaking to them alone. They ask not for my approbation, intending, as it should seem, to suppose me into their will. And with them I shall hope to prevail, and with nobody. They have not the interest in compelling me, as my brother and sister have. I say less, therefore, to them, reserving my whole force for an audience with my father, if he will permit me a patient ear. How difficult it is, my dear, to give a negative, where both duty and inclination join me to make one wish to oblige. I have already stood the shock of 3 of this man's particular visits. Besides my share in his more general ones, I find it impossible I should ever endure him. He has but a very ordinary share of understanding, is very illiterate, knows nothing but the value of estates and how to improve them, and what belongs to land jobbing and husbandry. Yet am I as one stupid, I think? They have begun so cruelly with me that I have not the spirit enough to assert my own negative. My good Mrs. Norton they have endeavored, it seems, to influence. Before I came home, so intent are they to carry out their point, and her opinion not being to her liking, she has been told that she would do well to decline visiting me here for the present. Yet she is a person of all the world, next to my mamma, the most likely to prevail upon me were the measures they are engaged in reasonable measures, or such that she could think so. My aunt likewise, having said that she did not think her niece could ever be brought to like Mr. Solmes, has obliged to learn another lesson. I am to have a visit from her tomorrow, and since I have refused so much as to hear from my brother and sister what the noble settlements are to be, she is to acquaint me with the particulars and to receive from me my determination. For my father, I am told, will not have patience to suppose that I shall stand in opposition to his will. Meantime, it has been signified to me that it will be acceptable if I do not think of going to church next Sunday. That the same signification was made to me for last Sunday, and I obeyed. They are apprehensive that Mr. Lovelace will be there with design to come home with me. Help me, dear Miss Howe, to a little of your charming spirit. I never more wanted it. The man, you may suppose, has no reason to boast of his progress with me. He has not the sense to say anything to the purpose. His courtship indeed is to them, and my brothers pretend to court me as his proxy, truly. I utterly to my brother refuse his application, but thinking a person so well received and recommended by all my family, entitled to good manners, all I say against him is affectionately attributed to coyness, and he, not being sensible of his own imperfections, believes that my avoiding him when I can, and the reserves I express are owing to nothing else, for, as I said, all his courtship is to them. And I have no opportunity of saying no to one who asked me not the question. And so, with an air of mannish superiority, he seems rather to pity the bashful girl than apprehend that he shall not succeed. February 25th. I have had the expected conference with my aunt. I have not obliged to hear the man's proposal from her and all their motives for espousing him to do so. I have been obliged to hear the man's proposals from her and all their motives for espousing him as they do. I am even loath to mention how equally unjust it is for him to make such offers, or for those I am bound to reverence to accept all of them. I hate him more than before. One great estate is already obtained at the expense of the relations to it, though distant relations, my brothers, I mean, by his godmother, and this has given the hope, however chimerical that hope of procuring others, and my own at least may revert to the family. And yet, in my opinion, the world is but one great family. Originally, it was so. What then is this narrow selfishness that reigns in us, but relationship remembered against relationship forgot? But here, upon my absolute refusal of him upon any terms, have I had a signification made that wounds me to the heart. How can I tell you? Yet I must. It is, my dear, that I must not for a month to come or till license obtained correspondence with anybody outside the house. My brother, upon my aunt's report, made, however, as I am informed, in the gentlest manner, and even giving remote hopes that she has no commission me to give, brought me into authoritative terms with the prohibition. Not to Miss Howe, said I. No, not to Miss Howe, madam, tartly, for you have not acknowledged that Lovelace is a favorite there. See, my dear Miss Howe, and do you think, brother, this is the way? Do you look to that? But your letters will be stopped, I can tell you. And away he flung. My sister came to me soon after. Sister Clary, you are going on in a fine way, I understand. But as there are people who are supposed to harden you against your duty, I am to tell you that it will be taken well if you avoid visits or visitings for a week or two until further notice. Can this be from those who have authority? Ask them, child, with a twirl of her finger. I have delivered my message. Your papa will be obeyed. He is willing to hope you will be all obedience and would prevent all incitements to refractoriness. I knew my duty, I said, and I hoped I should not find impossible conditions annexed to it. A pert young creature, vain and conceited, she called me. I was the only judge in my own wise opinion of what was right. She, for her part, had long seen through my specious ways, and now should I show everybody what I was at bottom. Dear Bella, said I, hands and eyes lifted up, why all this? Dear, dear Bella, why? None of you dear Bellas to me, I tell you, I see through your witchcraft. That was her strange word, and away she flung, adding as she went, and so will everyone else very quickly, I dare say. Bless me, said I to myself, what a sister have I? How have I deserved this? Then again regretted my grandfather's too distinguishing goodness to me. February 25th in the evening. What my brother and sister have said against me, I cannot tell, but I am in heavy disgrace. I am in heavy disgrace with my papa. I was sent down to tea. I went with a very cheerful aspect, but had occasion soon to change it. What a solemnity in everyone's countenance. My mama's eyes were fixed upon the teacups, and when she looked up, it was heavily, as if her eyelids had weights on them, and then not on me. My papa sat half aside with his elbow chair, that his head might be turned from me, his hands folded and waving, as it were, up and down, his fingers, poor dear gentleman, in motion, as if angry to the very end of them. My sister sat swelling. My brother looked at me with scorn, having measured me, as I may say, with his eyes, as I entered from head to foot. My aunt was there and looked upon me as if with kindness restrained, bending coldly to my compliment to her as she sat, and then cast an eye first on my brother and then on my sister, as if to give reason, so I am willing to construe it, of her unusual stiffness. Bless me, my dear, that they should choose to intimidate rather than invite a mind till now not thought either unpersuadable, excuse me, unpersuadable or ungenerous. I took my seat. Shall I make tea, madame, to my mamma, as I always used to say? You know, my dear, to make tea? No, a very short sentence in one very short word was the expressive answer, and she was pleased to take the canister into her own hand. My sister's Betty attending, my brother bid her go. He would fill the water. My heart was up at my mouth. I did not know what to do with myself. What is to follow, thought I. Just after the second dish out stepped my mamma. A word with you, Sister Hervey. Taking her in hand, presently my sister dropped away. Then my brother. So I was alone with my papa. He looked so sternly that my heart failed me, as twice or thrice I would have addressed myself to him. Nothing but solemn silence on all hands having passed. At last I asked if it were his pleasure that I should pour him out another dish. He answered me with an angry monosyllable, which I had received from my mamma before, and then arose and walked about the room. I arose too with an intent to throw myself at his feet, but was too much overawed by his sternness even to make an expression of my duty to him after my heart overflowed with. At last, as he supported himself because of his gout on the back of a chair, I took a little more courage and approached him, besought him to acquaint me with what I had offended him. He turned from me in his strong voice. Clarissa Harlowe, he said, know that I will be obeyed. God forbid, sir, that you should not. I have never yet opposed your will. Nor I your whims, Clarissa Harlowe, interrupted he. Don't let me run the fate of all who show indulgence to your sex, to be more contradicted for mine to you. My papa, you know, my dear, has not, any more than my brother, a kind opinion of our sex, although there is not a more condescending wife in the world than my mamma. I was going to make protestations of duty. No protestations, girl, no words. I will not be prated to. I will be obeyed. I have no child. I will have no child, but an obedient one. Sir, you never had reason, I hope. Tell me not what I never had, but what I have, and what I shall have. Good sir, be pleased to hear me. My brother and sister, I fear. Your brother and sister shall not be spoken against, girl. They have a just concern for the honor of my family. And I hope, sir. Hope nothing. Tell me not of hopes, but of facts. I ask nothing of you but what is in your power to comply with, and what is in your duty to comply with. Then, sir, I will comply with it, but yet I hope from your goodness No explanations, no buts, girl. No qualifyings. I will be obeyed, I tell you, and cheerfully too, or you are no child of mine. I wept. Let me beseech you, my dear and ever-honored papa, and I dropped down on my knees, that I may have only yours and my mama's will and not my brother's to obey. I was going on, but he was pleased to withdraw, leaving me on the floor, saying that he would not hear me thus by subtly and cunningly aiming to distinguish away my duty, repeating that he would be obeyed. My heart was too full, so full that it may endanger my duty were I to unburden it to you on this occasion. So I will lay down my pen. I can, yet positively I will lay down my pen. Miss Clarissa Harlow to Miss Howe. My aunt, who stayed here last night, made February 26th in the morning. My aunt, who stayed here last night, made me a visit this morning as soon as it was light. She tells me that I was left alone with my papa yesterday on purpose, that he might talk with me on my expected obedience, that he was put beside my purpose by reflecting upon my brother had told him in my disfavor, and by his impatience, but to suppose that such a gentle spirit as mine had hitherto seemed to presume to dispute his will in a point where the advantage of the whole family was so greatly promoted by my compliance. I find by a few words which dropped from her unawares that they have all an absolute dependence upon what they suppose to be a meekness in my temper. But in this they have been mistaken. For verily I think upon a strict examination of myself that I have not as much in me of my father's as of my mother's family. My Uncle Harlow, it seems, is against driving me upon extremities, but his unbrotherly nephew has engaged that regard I have for my reputation, and my principles will bring me round to my duty. That's the expression. Perhaps I shall have reason to wish I had not known this. My aunt advises me to submit for the present to the interdicts they have laid under me, and indeed to encourage Mr. Solmes's address. I have absolutely refused the latter, let what will, as I have told her to be the consequence. The visiting prohibition I will conform to, but as to that of not corresponding with you, nothing but the menace of that our letters shall be intercepted can engage my observation of it. She believes that this order is from my father without consulting my mother upon it, and that purely, as she supposes, in consideration to me, lest I shall mortally offend him, and that this is the incitements of other people, meaning you and Miss Lloyd, I make no doubt, rather than my own will, for still, as she tells me, he speaks kindly and praiseful things of me. Here is clemency, here is indulgence, and so it is to prevent a headstrong child, as good a prince would wish to do disaffected subjects, from running into rebellion and so forfeiting everything. But this is all my brother's young man wisdom, a plotter without a head, a brother without a heart. How happy might I have been with another brother in the world, but Mr. James Harlow, and with any other sister but his sister. Wonder not, my dear, that I, who used to chide you for all these sorts of liberties with my relations, Now I am more undutiful than you ever were unkind. I cannot bear the thought of being deprived of the principal pleasure of my life, for such is your conversation by person and by letter, and who besides can bear to be made the dupe of such a low, cunning, and operating with such a high and arrogant passion. But can you, my dear Miss Howe, consent to carry on a private correspondence with me? If you can, there is only one way I have thought by which it may be done. You must remember the green lane, as we called it, that runs by the side of the wood house and the poultry yard where I keep my bantams, pheasants, and peahens, which generally engage my notice twice a day. The more my favorites, because they were my grandfather's and recommended to my care by him, therefore brought hither from my dairy house since his death. The lane is lower than the floor of the wood house, and in the side of the wood house the boards are rotted away to the floor of the half of an L, together with several places. Hannah can step into the lane and make a mark with chalk where a letter or parcel may be pushed under some sticks, which may be so managed as to be unsuspected cover for the written deposits of either. I have been now to look at the place and will find it will answer. So your faithful Robert may, without coming near the house and only passing it through the green lane, which leads to 2 or 3 farmhouses, out of livery, if you please, very easily take from thence my letters and deposit yours. This place is more convenient because it's seldom resorted to but by myself or Hannah for the above mentioned account, for it is the general storehouse for the firing, the wood for constant use being nearer the house. One corner of this being separated off for the roosting place of my little poultry, either she or I shall never want a pretense to go thither. Try, my dear, the success of a letter this way, and give your opinion and advice on what to do in this disgraceful situation, as I cannot but call it, and what you think of my prospects and what you would do in my case. But beforehand, I must tell you that your advice must not run in favor of this Solmes, and yet it is very likely they will endeavor to engage your mamma in order to induce you, who have such an influence over me, to favor him. Yet, on second thoughts, if you incline to take that side of the question, I would have you write your whole mind. Determined as I think I am and cannot help it, I would at least give a patient hearing to what may be said on the other side. For my regards are not so much engaged, upon my word they are not. I know not myself if they be, to another person, as some friends I suppose, as to you, given way to your lively vein, and upon his last visits affected to suppose. What preferable favor I may have for him to any other person, owing more than the usage he has received, and for my sake borne, than any other consideration. I write a few lines of grateful acknowledgement to your mamma for her favors to me in the late happy period. I fear I shall never know such another. I hope she will forgive me that I did not write sooner. The bearer, if suspected and examined, is to produce that as the only one he carries. How do needless watchfulness and undue restraint produce artifice, contrivance? I shall abhor these clandestine correspondences were they not forced upon me. They have so mean, so low an appearance to myself that I think I ought not to expect that you should take part in them. But why, as I have also postulated to enter into, why should I not, my brother, so many years older and so earnest to see me engage, be first engaged? If not so, why not my sister be first provided for? But here I conclude these unveiling apostolations with the assurance that I am and ever will be your affectionate Clarissa Harlow.
All right, that's an hour.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brad. I'm going to stop the recording for a second.
Okay.
Hold on.
It looks like you froze. You're still there, Kirk? Are you still there? What's up, man? Just a second.